All right, action, take one.
All right, guys, so yesterday we talked about tenths and hundredths place, which was a review from grade 4. And in grade 5, we're gonna expand it to include this thousandths place. So this shouldn't be too difficult. It just means we are moving to the right of the decimal point one more place. So we're gonna look at these notes, so you wanna dig those out and follow along. So we'll just go through it. We have 3 different examples here. So on a place value chart, we have the number 0 in the ones place, and we put our decimal here, a 3 in the tenths, a 4 in the hundredths, and a 5 in the thousandths place. Now, if we want to show that as a fraction, we would say we know we've got 345 thousandths. So we've got 345 parts out of 1,000. So there's our fraction. And if we want to show it as a decimal, we know we have a 0 in the ones, 3 in the tenths, 4 in the hundredths, and 5 in the thousandths. So we've got 345 thousandths, okay? So there's 2 different ways of showing it, fraction and decimal. Okay, in the notes now, following along, we have a new number. We have 2 decimal 0 1 3. So now we have a whole number here. We have a 2 in the ones place, a 0 in the tenths, a 1 in the hundredths, and a 3 in the thousandths. So how we can show that as a fraction, for example, we can say we have 2 and 13 thousandths. So I can just put a 2 here. It's a whole number, it's not a fraction. And I have 13 out of 1,000, 13 thousandths. So this is how we would show that. This is actually called a mixed number. And we haven't talked about these, but this is called a mixed number because it's got a whole and a fraction. Okay, so that's how you show a fraction with a whole. That's actually not in your notes, but you know, you're just lucky you get me to tell you. Okay, so that as a decimal, we'll follow along in our place value chart. It's actually 2 decimal 0 1 3. 2 and 13 thousandths. Can you hear me over the construction? Right, let's move on to our next one. 0 0 0 8. Okay, so what this tells me is I only have 8 thousandths. I have 8 out of 1,000. And as a decimal, I would just have to show it as an 8 in the thousandths place. Okay? So this is, wow, it's very loud today. So that's how we can write decimals and fractions and how they relate to each other using the thousandths place. Now, if you look at the back side of your notes, there's a little more explanation. This next part shows you kind of how to take a fraction and show it as a decimal a little more easier, or a little more easily. Sorry, that was terrible English. So we've got 1/2, okay? And now we want to write some fractions and some decimals that are equivalent or that are equal. So what our notes are showing is if we multiply both sides, or sorry, the denominator and the numerator, denominator and numerator, by 5 times 5, we get 5 tenths, right? 2 times 5 is 10, 1 times 5 is 5. Okay, so these two are equal. And now we're going to multiply to make this bottom number 1,000. we're going to multiply it by 100. And then we have to multiply the numerator by 100 as well. So 5 times 100, you should remember that. We just add 2 zeros at the end, right? So it's 500 over 1,000. So now if we have 500 over 1,000, we have 500 thousandths. How can we show that as a decimal? Well, I'm just trying to follow our notes so you can follow too. Yeah, so 500 thousandths would be, we want that last zero in the 500 to be in the thousandths place. So how can we do that? Okay, so that means the 5 has to go in the tenths place, because we want, here's our tenths, here's our hundredths, and here's our thousandths. So this is 500 thousandths. So that means that this fraction is 0.500, okay? Which also then means, because we said 1/2 is equal to 5/10, which is equal to 501,000ths, we know that 1/2 is also going to be equal to 0.500. These are all equivalent, okay? And there's another example right beside this one that you can look at on your own to kind of just reiterate and just make sure you understand what we did here. Let's just look through these notes. So we've got a decimal and expanded form to show the value of each digit. So we've got 3.248 expanded to 3 ones, plus 2 tenths, plus 4 hundredths, plus 8 thousandths. And then we can also show it like that, as decimals each. And that's expanded form, okay? So our last example here, we have a thousandths grid. So imagine that we have 10 of these. Each one of these big holes has 100 little squares in it. So if we have 10 of these, we've got 1,000 little squares. And so what your example is asking is, what happens when you've got 300 small squares in the thousandths hole shaded in? So we've got 300 out of 1,000 squares shaded in. So to show that as a decimal, we have 300 thousandths. So our last number has to land in the thousandths place. So that's our decimal right there. What it's also saying is that this is 300 small squares shaded in, but we can also think about it as 30 rows of 10 squares, because there's 10 big squares, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we've got 3 of those shaded in. Or sorry, we've got 30 rows shaded in. So we've got 30 out of 100 shaded in. So how would we show that as a decimal? We've got 30 hundredths. So we know our last number has to land in the hundredths place. So there's our 30 hundredths. And also, if we have 3 large squares out of 10 shaded in, which is what we do have, right? 1, 2, 3 out of 10. So we show 3/10 shaded in, which we know as a decimal is 0.3. So all of this just to tell you that 300 thousandths is equal to 30 hundredths is equal to 3/10. So let's just show that. So these are all equivalent, which is another word for equal. okay? And now, today, you can move on and do these worksheets. This worksheet has a nice little explanation at the top to remind you about our lesson, and then you've got some work to do there, and then you have this worksheet here, which just explores digit values. So you're just expected to give the value of the underlying digit. So for example, is the tenths value underlined? Is the hundreds? Yeah, I think you guys can figure that out. So that is all for today.